She gave a tired man a glass of water and was fired the next morning. No one knew who he was. No ID, no guards, just dusty clothes and weary eyes. But what Layla didn't realize was that the man she helped was the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, traveling in secret. And what happened next would shock an entire nation, from a forgotten roadside cafe to the halls of presidential power. One act of quiet Islamic kindness would change everything. "I didn't serve a president," she would later say, "I served a man in need." That's what Islam taught me. Stay to the end, because what started with a sip of water became a national awakening. The sky above Ouagadougou hung low and dusty, thick with the dry heat of early evening. Outside the bustling streets of the capital, far from government halls and foreign embassies, sat a fading roadside cafe with flickering lights and cracked floor tiles. It wasn't much, but to Layla, Kamara was her second home. At 22, Layla had grown used to silence, not the silence of absence, but the silence of restraint. She spoke little, worked hard, and rarely looked anyone in the eye unless it was necessary. Her hijab was always neat, her uniform simple, and her presence quietly dignified. She worked the closing shift most nights, wiping down tables long after the traffic died out, and the other waitresses begged to leave early. Her family needed the money, her younger brother was still in school, and her mother's medication wasn't cheap. Her father had died 3 years ago, a quiet man who had taught her to never speak more than needed, and to always serve without expecting thanks. That lesson stayed with her. She didn't complain when customers ignored her salams. She didn't retaliate when coworkers mocked her modesty behind her back. She didn't even flinch when her manager barked orders at her like she was invisible. To Layla, the real work was not in carrying trays, but in carrying herself with patience. And though no one saw it every night before she began her shift, Layla would step into the small storage room, close the door, and whisper, "A short dua ya Allah, let me serve with kindness today. Even if no one sees it, let you see it." There were no dreams of luxury in her heart. Layla didn't want fame. She didn't want power. She only wanted two things: to finish her nursing degree and to please Allah through whatever humble path He gave her. But in a city where corruption whispered through every hallway, where kindness was seen as weakness and greed wore the mask of progress, girls like Layla were often overlooked until one night, everything changed. It was almost closing time. The other workers were packing up early, as usual, leaving Layla to mop the floors. The cafe was empty except for a flickering television in the corner, replaying old political debates. The fan squeaked overhead. Layla stacked the final tray of dishes and reached for the mop bucket when the door creaked open behind her. A man stepped in, quiet, tired, dust-covered. His eyes scanned the cafe slowly and then landed on her. He looked ordinary, worn boots, a dark scarf wrapped around his neck, a face that looked like it had seen many sunrises without rest. Layla offered a small salam, as she always did. "Assalamu alaikum, uncle." The man gave a faint nod and walked toward the counter. The air shifted. There was something unusual in the way he moved, slow, deliberate but not weak, as if he was watching, absorbing, measuring something unseen. He placed a hand on the counter gently and said, "Could I trouble you for a glass of water?" Layla blinked once. No hesitation. Of course she didn't know it then, but this man, dusty, quiet, and alone, wasn't just another traveler. He was President Ibrahim Traoré, and her next act would ripple across an entire nation. Layla poured a tall glass of cool water, placing it gently on the counter with a quiet smile. The man nodded in thanks, his hand trembling slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips. She noticed the dust on his sleeves, the dryness in his skin, the heaviness in his eyes, the look of a man who had seen too much and slept too little. He wasn't just tired, he was burdened. "You can sit if you'd like," she offered. "We're almost closed, but it's quiet now. You look like you need a break more than I do." The man hesitated, then sat down near the far window. The cafe was empty but for the faint hum of electricity and the whirring ceiling fan. Outside, the wind carried swirls of dust against the street lamps, casting moving shadows across the cafe walls. Layla ducked into the back and reappeared with a piece of flatbread and a boiled egg wrapped in paper. "I didn't charge it yet, so no one will notice if it's gone." "Please," she added, pushing the plate toward him. Eat something. The man stared at her for a moment, eyes narrowing not in suspicion but in thought. Then he smiled faintly and said, "You share your meal, even before I ask." Layla shrugged gently. "You looked hungry." He ate slowly, not like a man devouring a meal, but like someone savoring peace after too long without it. Between bites, he glanced at her, watching how she continued cleaning with quiet dedication. She didn't hover, didn't wait for praise. She simply moved as if serving was part of her prayer. There was a long pause, then he asked, "Do you always treat strangers this way?" Layla wiped down a table and responded without looking up. "My father taught me to treat everyone like they could be an answer to my dua. And Islam taught me that the best of people are those who serve without being seen." The man set his cup down, his expression unreadable now. He looked to the small wall-mounted TV, which was playing a news segment about recent reforms in Burkina Faso, highlighting public trust, transparency, youth leadership. Layla didn't seem to notice. She was too busy sweeping near the door, humming a soft nasheed under her breath. But he noticed her glance once, just once, at the image of the president on the screen, and then look away, uninterested. "What do you think of him?" the man asked casually. Layla paused, unsure if it was a trick question. Then she answered honestly, "He's trying. I don't know politics, but I know sincerity when I see it or when I don't. And I've heard stories that he moves quietly like he wants to see the country with his own eyes." She chuckled, "But those are probably just rumors." The man gave a small smile, not of pride but of quiet amusement. "Maybe not all rumors are false." Layla tilted her head, puzzled. But before she could ask, the man stood up. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few coins, placing them on the counter. She pushed them back gently. "No, I gave it. It wasn't for sale." The man held her gaze, not with authority, but with an emotion far deeper. Respect, gratitude, almost pain. He nodded once. "Thank you, Layla." She blinked. "Did I tell you my name?" But he was already turning toward the door. "No," he said softly. "You didn't have to." And then just like that, he was gone, swallowed into the dusty night. She stood there in silence for a long time, heart strangely unsettled. She had helped dozens of strangers before, but something about this one felt different. She didn't know it yet, but the dust he left behind would carry her name all the way to the highest office in the land. The next morning, Layla arrived at the cafe before the sun had fully risen. She walked through the back alley in silence, the call to Fajr still echoing faintly behind her. Her shoes crunched against loose gravel, and her hijab fluttered in the cool dawn wind. She wasn't late. She was never late. As she stepped inside, she greeted the cook and the cleaner with her usual quiet salam. But something was different. The atmosphere felt sharp, thick, like something in the air had been sliced open. Her manager was waiting for her near the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "Come here, Kamara." She approached without flinching. "Yes, sir." He pulled a receipt from the counter and waved it in front of her face. "You gave away food last night, didn't charge it, didn't report it. That's theft." She blinked slowly, not in shock, in patience. "He asked only for water. I gave him what I had left. No one had claimed it, I thought." "You thought?" he snapped. "You're not paid to think. You're paid to follow rules." The cleaner watched from the back, head lowered. The cook pretended not to hear. "Do you think we run a charity here?" the manager barked. "Do you know how many beggars try to come in every week? If we start feeding every tired face, we'll be out of business." Layla lowered her gaze and said nothing. Her silence somehow made him angrier. "That's it," he said, tossing her apron on the floor. "You're done here. No final warning. No hearing. No room for apology, just like that." Her income was gone, not for stealing, not for lying, not for slacking, but for offering a stranger water and bread. Layla picked up the apron from the floor, dusted it gently, folded it, and placed it on the counter. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply said, "Alhamdulillah, may Allah repay what I've lost." Then she turned and walked out. The streets were just beginning to stir. The sun stretched slowly over Ouagadougou's rooftops as Layla made her way home. She didn't take a motorbike. She didn't text her mother. She just walked. Her thoughts were calm but heavy. Was it wrong to help someone? Was this a test or a mistake? She replayed the man's quiet voice in her head. You didn't have to tell me your name. It lingered, not like a compliment, like a prophecy. She arrived at her apartment, washed up quietly and spread her prayer mat beside the window. The morning sun spilled across the rug like mercy itself. As she bowed her head in the sujud, her tears finally came not out of regret, but release. Ya Allah, if I lost my job in your path, let it be written as something beloved to you. She didn't pray for the cafe to take her back. She didn't pray for revenge. She simply asked Allah to accept what little she had offered and replace it with something better. And then she rose, rolled up the mat, and began preparing breakfast for her little brother before he woke for school. No fanfare, no drama, just sincerity, the kind this world rarely sees, but heaven never misses. While Layla was washing dishes at home, still unsure what the day would bring, the presidential residence in Ouagadougou was stirring with unusual activity. President Ibrahim Traoré had returned the night before unannounced. His security detail was rattled. He'd slipped away again, dressed like an ordinary man, with no convoy, no cameras, no protocol. He did this often. It was how he stayed connected to the people. But this time, something was different. He walked into the security office past midnight, still wearing the same dusty scarf, and sat at the head of the room. I need you to find someone, he said. The room fell silent. A general leaned forward. Sir, who Traoré reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper napkin. Inside was a piece of flatbread carefully wrapped. Her name is Layla Kamara. She works at a small cafe off the East Bypass. She served me last night without knowing who I was. No cameras, no speeches, just kindness. The officials exchanged glances. Did something happen, sir? Traoré looked down at the napkin. Yes, he said softly. Something rare happened. A heart shined, in the middle of a city choking on dust. He looked back up, voice firmer now. I want her found by tomorrow, not to punish, to honor, one of his aides hesitated. And if she refuses to speak publicly, the president paused, then smiled gently. Then we'll honor her quietly, but people like her must be seen, especially now. Within hours, quiet orders were dispatched. Staff scanned employee records, visited cafes in the area, and asked questions without revealing why. It wasn't hard to find her. Her hijab, her politeness, and the sudden firing had left a trail of whispered memories. By mid-afternoon, a plain black car was sent to her apartment. Layla's mother, startled by the knock, opened the door to find two well-dressed men standing respectfully outside. Is this the home of Miss Layla Kamara? She nodded slowly, clutching her scarf tighter. The president would like to meet her. Her heart dropped. Not out of fear, but disbelief. Layla, standing behind her mother, blinked in stunned silence. That evening, the airwaves in Burkina Faso were buzzing with expectation. Rumors had spread President Ibrahim Traoré was scheduled to make a surprise live address. No one knew why. There was no national emergency, no policy announcement. Still, people gathered around TVs, radios, and live streams, curious in marketplaces, cafes, and quiet homes. The screen lit up with the familiar sight of the president at his podium. But this time he wasn't wearing his uniform. He stood in a simple dark shirt without medals or flags. No script in hand, just a napkin folded in half, clutched gently between his fingers. He looked into the camera, paused, and began. My people, last night I walked your streets without guards. I visited your cafes, your neighborhoods, and your people. Not as a leader, but as a man. The room behind the camera was silent. He held up the napkin. This is not a symbol of power. It is not worth money. It will never sit in a museum. But to me, it is priceless because inside it was a piece of bread offered to me by a woman who did not know who I was. She did not see a title or a suit or a camera. She saw a man in need and gave without question. Across the country, eyes widened. Mothers paused while stirring soup. Young men lowered their phones. Old women leaned closer to their radios. She didn't ask me for anything. Not a photo, not a favor, not even a name. She simply said, "You look like you've had a long day." That moment reminded me why I serve this country. Because it still holds people like her. He set the napkin down gently on the podium. Her name, he said, his voice catching for a moment, is Layla Kamara. And tonight I want every person watching, every citizen, every leader, every official to remember this name. At that very moment, in a small 2-room apartment just outside Ouagadougou, Layla sat frozen in front of the TV. Her mother had been watching the address with little interest until they heard that name. Layla's name. Her mother gasped. Her brother stared in disbelief. Layla dropped the spoon she had been holding, her eyes wide, lips parted. No, that can't be. But the president continued. She lost her job for showing compassion. She gave without hesitation. And she reminded me, and perhaps all of us, that leadership is not just about policies and speeches. It's about remembering the people who live in silence, who serve in the shadows, and who act with sincerity when no one is watching. He looked up once more. Layla Kamara, if you are watching, I want you to know your kindness did not go unseen. Tomorrow you are invited to the presidential hall, not as a citizen needing help, but as a woman this nation should honor. Layla stared at the screen as the broadcast faded to black. The apartment was completely silent. Then quietly her mother began to weep. Your father would have been so proud. Layla stood slowly overcome. She walked into her room, laid her prayer mat down and fell into sujood. Not out of pride, not out of shock, but out of pure, shaking gratitude. Ya Allah, I only wanted you to see me, and now the world has seen what you already knew. The next morning, Ouagadougou woke up to a different kind of news. Her name was on every headline. Layla Kamara, the girl who taught the nation mercy, president honors hijabi, waitress on live TV, the bread that changed everything. But in a small apartment tucked between 2 dusty alleyways, Layla was still reeling in silence. She hadn't opened social media. She hadn't answered the phone. She sat beside her Quran, reading softly as the world outside called her name. Then came the knock, not urgent, not aggressive, just respectful. Her mother opened the door. 2 black cars were parked at the curb. A man in a navy blue suit stood with a folder tucked beneath his arm. Assalamu alaikum, he said gently. Miss Layla Kamara. Layla stepped forward, her heart pounding. Yes, the man smiled. The president would like to meet with you today. Her mother's hands flew to her mouth. Is she in trouble? She asked, voice shaking. No, ma'am, the man said with a kind smile. She's being honored inside the car. Layla clutched her bag tightly. She had worn her best abaya, simple black with pearl buttons on the cuffs. Her scarf was pinned perfectly, not for show but out of adab. She didn't want to represent herself. She wanted to represent Islam. She said little during the drive. The guards didn't speak unless spoken to, but the air carried a strange stillness, the kind that comes when something rare is happening. As they pulled through the gates of the presidential hall, her breath caught in her throat. The tall white columns, the flag rising above the stone courtyard, the cameras waiting by the entrance. You'll enter through the east wing, one of the aides said quietly. No press inside. The president wants to meet you personally without distraction. Layla nodded, her knees slightly trembling. As they walked through the marbled hallway, every step echoed louder than the last. Then the doors opened. There was no grand throne, no army of officials, just President Ibrahim Traoré, standing near a window, hands behind his back, dressed simply, waiting. He turned when she entered, his face breaking into the same soft smile she remembered from the cafe. Layla Kamara, he said warmly, it's good to see you again. Her heart raced, but she bowed her head with grace. Assalamu alaikum, Mr. President. Wa alaikum salam, he replied. Please, come sit. She walked slowly to the chair across from him, still unsure if this was real. He sat, leaned forward, and looked her in the eye. You didn't know who I was, he said, but you gave me water. Bred dignity. You served a stranger as if he were someone important. She lowered her gaze. You were someone in need, she said simply. And Islam teaches us that serving one's soul is better than chasing titles. Traoré smiled. Exactly. That's why you're here. President Traoré leaned back in his chair, and reached for a document on the table beside him. He unfolded it carefully and placed it in front of Layla. "This is a national award," he said. "The Medal of Civil Honor. Few receive it. Fewer still deserve it without asking." Layla stared at the gold-trimmed certificate, her breath caught in her chest. "I'm just a waitress," she whispered. The president shook his head. "No, you are a reminder. A reminder that power means nothing without character. That religion, when lived sincerely, speaks louder than 1,000 speeches." He slid the medal across the table, then paused. "But I didn't bring you here only to thank you." Layla looked up unsure. "I brought you here to ask for something." She raised an eyebrow. "Sir," he smiled, "we are forming a National Youth Advisory Council. One seat is reserved for a civilian who represents faith integrity and moral clarity. Someone who can remind us what matters when politics become noisy. I want that seat to be yours." Layla blinked. Her fingers tightened over the edge of her scarf. "Me, but I have no education in politics. I haven't even finished university. You've passed a test no classroom could prepare you for." Traoré replied, "You showed mercy without knowing you were being watched. That's leadership." She didn't respond immediately. She stared at the seal of the presidency etched in gold on the envelope, then back at the president. "If I accept, I want one condition." He leaned forward. "Name it. I don't want a salary. Use it for scholarships for girls like me." President Traoré smiled, not just with his lips but with his eyes, with his heart. He extended his hand. "You're already leading." Layla shook it gently. The news spread within hours. Photos of Layla receiving the medal, her black abaya flowing, her hijab framed against the national flag, swept across every major outlet. Hijabi girl who fed a stranger joins Presidential Advisory Council. A nation reawakens to character over status. Islamic mercy on display in Burkina Faso. In her old cafe, the manager stood frozen before the television. The very same employee he had fired was now being honored by the head of state. The cook wiped his hands and murmured, "Subhanallah." Even her former co-workers, once indifferent or dismissive, shared clips on their phones and whispered apologies behind closed doors. But Layla didn't post anything. She didn't bask in attention. That evening, she returned home quietly, helped her mother prepare dinner, and tucked her brother into bed. The next morning, she rose early. There were no reporters outside, no fanfare. Just Layla walking to the masjid for Fajr, her Quran tucked gently under her arm. As she walked past a fruit stall, a young girl in hijab called out, "Are you the girl from the news?" Layla smiled gently. "I'm just someone who brought water to a tired man." The girl grinned. "My mama said you were brave." Layla paused, then knelt. "Tell your mom I wasn't brave. I was simply doing what a Muslim should do." Always. Later that day, she sat before the National Advisory Council for the first time. Old men in suits, journalists, youth leaders, all waiting for her to speak. She stood slowly, adjusted her scarf, and looked out at the room. "I didn't ask to be here, but I've been trusted with a voice. I'll use it to remind us all the greatest leaders are those who serve quietly even when no one is watching, and Islam teaches us that true greatness begins with sincerity." The room erupted in applause, but Layla didn't smile out of pride. She smiled out of peace. A week later, Layla was invited to give a short interview on national television. The studio was modest, the host warm, but as the lights came on and the cameras rolled, Layla felt the weight of every silent Muslim girl who had ever been overlooked, mocked, or unseen. She sat calmly, hands folded, eyes clear. She wasn't nervous, not because she was used to attention, but because her heart wasn't there for it. The host smiled. "Layla, Kamara, you've become a national figure in just days. What do you want people to remember most from all of this?" Layla took a breath and answered without hesitation, "That I didn't serve a president, I served a tired man who asked for water." She paused. "I didn't act because a camera was watching. I acted because I thought Allah might be." Islam teaches us that every act of kindness, even a sip of water, is an act of worship if it's done with sincerity. The room fell quiet. The host blinked, visibly moved. "Did you ever imagine this would happen?" Layla shook her head gently. "No, I only asked Allah to see me. And sometimes, When he does, the whole world sees you too, not for who you are, but for what faith can make you. The interview ended, the cameras dimmed, but the message did not. Across the country, families gathered around their screens, not just to see Layla, but to see themselves in her, the quiet believers, the sincere workers, the veiled women, the unseen servants of good. That night, Layla returned home unbothered by headlines, untouched by status. She prayed in her small room, recited Quran beneath the soft light of her desk lamp, and thanked Allah not for the reward, but for the chance to do good unseen. Somewhere in another town, a girl watched her story and tied her hijab with pride for the first time. Somewhere else, a young boy gave water to an old man just in case it mattered. And somewhere far off, a cafe owner rewrote his policies and printed a sign that read, "We serve with dignity, whether you wear a crown or carry dust." If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments below. Share it with someone who needs to remember that sincerity, even unseen, echoes beyond what we imagine. Subscribe to Muslim Storyboard for more stories that awaken faith. What if a small act of kindness cost you your job, but opened the door to a future beyond your wildest dreams? This is the true story of Maryam, a young Muslim waitress in Paris who chose compassion over rules and paid the price. She didn't know the man she helped was the president of a nation in disguise, and she certainly didn't know her life was about to change forever. Stay with us, because what started as a quiet sacrifice would soon ignite a journey of honor, destiny, and faith. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of hope. The evening air inside the Parisian cafe was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and tired conversation. Maryam moved swiftly between tables, a soft smile masking the weight in her chest. She had been working double shifts to keep up with rent, a quiet struggle she shared with no one. Near closing time, a man entered, quietly blending into the background. Dressed in a faded hoodie and worn shoes, he looked no different from the countless faces that drifted through the city unnoticed. Maryam approached with her usual warmth. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" The man offered a small, grateful smile. "Just pasta and some orange juice, please." He said. His French was gentle, almost musical. Later, when she brought the bill, Maryam noticed him fumbling through his pockets, growing visibly distressed. His wallet was missing. His cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I must have left it at home." Her manager's harsh words echoed in her mind. "No payment, no service. We're a business, not a charity." For a heartbeat, Maryam hesitated. Then silently, she reached into her own wallet. She paid for his meal without fanfare, simply placing the receipt on the table with a gentle nod. "This one's on me," she said softly. "Everyone has rough days." The man's eyes widened. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude too deep for words. "May Allah reward you, Maryam," he said, reading her name from the receipt. She smiled, turned away, and continued her shift. She thought no more of it, but fate had already begun to move. The next evening, Maryam was called into the manager's cramped office before her shift began. He tossed a receipt onto the desk between them like an accusation. "You paid for someone's meal," he said coldly. "Yes," she answered, standing tall. "He couldn't pay. It was a small plate of pasta." "Oh, it's not about the money," the manager snapped. "It's about principle. You disrespected company policy. You made us look weak." Maryam's stomach twisted. "I was trying to show compassion," she said. "And compassion doesn't pay the bills." He growled, "You're fired, effective immediately." For a moment, the world blurred around her. She had barely enough savings to survive a month. Rent, food, everything hung by a thread, and now even that thread had snapped. But she tried again. "Ada, please, get out," he said. Turning away, Maryam gathered her things in silence, blinking back the sting of humiliation. Outside, Paris buzzed on as if nothing had changed. She walked past glittering storefronts and glowing cafes, invisible to the world she had served so faithfully. Tears welled in her eyes. Was this what kindness cost? Was there no room for mercy anymore? As the wind bit into her skin, she whispered a prayer into the night. "Ya Allah, you know my heart. Guide me through this darkness." Little did Maryam know, while she wept quietly under the Parisian sky, A door she could not yet see had already been opened. The morning after her dismissal, Mariam sat by the window of her tiny apartment, nursing a cup of cold tea. The city outside moved as always, hurried, indifferent, relentless to Paris. She was just another invisible figure. To Mariam herself, she was beginning to feel like a failure. She had spent the night applying to new jobs, cafes, bakeries, even cleaning offices. But each submission felt like tossing pebbles into the ocean. No replies, no hope. Still, she refused to let despair swallow her. After praying Fajr, she whispered into her hands, "Ya Allah, I trust in your plan, even if I cannot see it." That afternoon, as she walked along Rue de Vaugirard, lost in thought, a sleek black car slowed beside her. Mariam instinctively tightened her scarf and stepped away wary. The window rolled down smoothly. A man in a dark suit, polite and professional, leaned toward her. "Excuse me, are you Mariam?" She blinked. "Yes, who's asking?" "My name is Daniel," he said with a respectful nod. "I work with President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. He asked me to find you." Mariam stared, thinking she had misheard. "The president," she echoed. Daniel smiled gently. "Yes, the man you helped at the cafe. That was him." Her breath caught. The faded hoodie, the humble manner, the gratitude in his eyes, that man. He was traveling under low-profile security for diplomatic reasons. Daniel explained, he insisted on moving freely among ordinary people. "Your kindness," it moved him deeply. Mariam struggled to find her voice. I didn't do anything special," she stammered. Daniel shook his head. "You did everything special. You acted when it mattered with no knowledge of who he was and no thought of reward." He extended a small formal card toward her. "President Traoré would like to meet you in person if you are willing." Mariam's heart raced. Was this real or some cruel joke? She looked at Daniel, saw nothing but sincerity in his gaze. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "I'm willing." The door of the car swung open, and she slid inside, hands trembling slightly. As they pulled away from the curb, she whispered another prayer, her heart swelling with equal parts fear and hope. "Ya Allah, if this is from you, guide me to it with grace." The car wove through the bustling streets of Paris, past cafes and bookshops, across bridges arching over the gray ribbon of the Seine. Finally, they pulled up before an understated luxury hotel, the kind diplomats used to keep a low profile. Inside, in a private salon overlooking the city, Mariam saw him, no longer the man in a hoodie, but standing tall in a crisp white shirt, an aura of quiet power surrounding him. Ibrahim Traoré turned when she entered, his face lit with a warm, genuine smile. He stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Mariam," he said, "thank you for seeing a human being, not a title." And in that moment, Mariam realized her life had already changed, not because she chased greatness, but because she had honored goodness when no one else was looking. Mariam stood motionless for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. She had no script for this, no guide on how to meet a president she once mistook for an ordinary man. But Ibrahim Traoré's presence wasn't intimidating. It was reassuring, like standing before an ancient, immovable tree. He gestured to a chair across from him. "Please sit." Mariam obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. Traoré leaned forward, his voice steady, sincere. "In my travels," he began, "I have met kings and businessmen, politicians and scholars, but very few have treated me like a brother when they thought I had nothing to offer them." Mariam opened her mouth, but no words came. Her heart pounded against her ribs. "You showed mercy when you believed no one would see. That is the mark of true leadership, true humanity." He continued, "And the world needs more of it." She swallowed hard. I didn't do anything extraordinary." She managed. "You did exactly what was extraordinary." He said, his eyes never leaving hers. "In a time when the world measures worth by wealth and appearance, you chose kindness." He reached for a small folder sitting on the table. Opening it, he slid a document across to her. The official seal of Burkina Faso gleamed faintly at the top. "We are launching a new initiative, an international cooperation program focused on cultural diplomacy and humanitarian hospitality. We need people we can trust, people with heart, not just ambition." Mariam stared at the document. Her name was already written there. A formal offer of employment, a new life, a new beginning. She shook her head in disbelief. But I'm just a waitress. She said, the old doubt creeping in. Traoré smiled a warm, patient smile. You are not just anything, Mariam. You are proof that titles do not create worth, actions do. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to break the sacredness of this moment. You have the qualities we value most. He said, compassion, integrity, courage to act when it is inconvenient. Mariam placed a trembling hand over her heart. I don't know if I'm ready, she whispered. He leaned back, folding his hands calmly. None of us are ever fully ready for the doors Allah opens. He said, we walk through them with faith. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the soft murmur of Paris beyond the windows. Finally, Mariam lifted her chin, strength returning to her voice. I accept. Traoré smiled again, broader this time. Then welcome, Mariam. Your journey has just begun. As she signed the document, the magnitude of what was happening hit her all at once. The girl once dismissed for helping a stranger was now stepping into a world few ever imagined. Not because she chased titles, but because she followed sincerity, and in the quiet signing of her name, Mariam's story took flight, carried by the invisible winds of destiny. The first few weeks at the International Cooperation Center were both exhilarating and overwhelming. Mariam moved through the grand halls, carefully learning protocols, attending briefings, and meeting dignitaries who carried titles and power she had once only seen in news headlines. Yet not everyone welcomed her presence. Whispers floated behind her back. She's just a waitress. How could someone like her be trusted with diplomatic affairs? Maybe it's just charity work from the president. Though no one said it to her face, Mariam felt it in every stiff smile and every cold glance. She was not from the polished universities or elite circles they were used to. She was an outsider wearing borrowed shoes. One afternoon, while arranging final touches for a delegation's welcoming ceremony, a senior official named Madame Moreau approached her, clipboard in hand. Her tone clipped and icy. You're Mariam, yes? She asked, eyebrows arched. Yes, madam, Mariam replied politely. Moreau's eyes scanned her critically. Let's be clear. This is not a cafe. This is international diplomacy. If you embarrass us, it reflects on all of us. Mariam bit her tongue, feeling the sting of humiliation rise in her chest. I understand, she said calmly. Later that evening, as she walked home under the soft glow of Parisian streetlights, Mariam replayed the encounter again and again. Doubt gnawed at her heart. Was she truly meant to be here? Had she stepped too far beyond her place? She stopped at a small bridge over the Seine, watching the dark waters flow steadily beneath her. The city sparkled in the distance, beautiful and oblivious. She whispered into the cold night air, Ya Allah, if this path is from, you make me strong enough to walk it. The next day, Mariam decided she would not defend herself with words. She would defend herself with excellence. She arrived earlier than anyone else. She triple-checked every seating chart, every name tag, every dietary preference. She learned small details about each delegation, who preferred Arabic greetings, who required wheelchair accommodations, who observed strict dietary laws. And when the day of the summit arrived, it was Mariam's invisible care that made everything flow seamlessly. Ambassadors praised the attention to detail. Guests commented on the warm, respectful atmosphere. Even Madame Moreau was forced to offer a curt, reluctant nod of approval. But Mariam didn't seek their approval. She sought something deeper, the silent satisfaction of knowing she had fulfilled her trust with sincerity and excellence for Allah's sake. As the evening lights dimmed over the grand hall and guests departed with smiles, Mariam stood quietly by the entrance, unseen again, but this time not because she was ignored. This time she chose invisibility. She chose to let her work, her character, her service speak for her, and slowly, one respectful nod, one whispered compliment, one sincere handshake at a time, the walls that once kept her out began to crumble. Her battle was far from over, but she was no longer fighting for permission to belong. She was proving she already did. Weeks turned into months, and the invisible walls that had once pressed against Mariam began to shift. She wasn't just enduring anymore. She was growing. Her once uncertain steps now carried quiet confidence. Her voice, once hesitant, was steady when she spoke during briefings. She had earned something far greater than titles: trust. One crisp morning, as golden light poured through the windows of the International Cooperation Center, Miriam received a message from Daniel. "President Traoré would like to see you, executive boardroom, 10 a.m. Her heart leapt. She checked her watch, 9:45 a.m. With a deep breath and a whispered prayer, she adjusted her hijab, straightened her blazer, and made her way up the grand marble staircase. Inside the boardroom, she found President Traoré and several high-ranking officials seated around a gleaming mahogany table, folders, documents, and cups of steaming coffee scattered between them. "Miriam," Daniel greeted warmly, motioning to the empty seat across from the president. She sat unsure what to expect. President Traoré leaned forward, folding his hands thoughtfully. His voice, as always, was calm, but carried the weight of something important. "We've been observing you," he began. "Not your resume, but your heart in action." Miriam felt her chest tighten. "You have handled pressure with dignity," he continued. "You have turned criticism into growth. You've honored your role without seeking spotlight. And for that," he smiled, "we want to promote you." Daniel slid a document across the table. In bold letters, Miriam saw the title Director of Cultural and Diplomatic Hospitality. Her breath caught. Director. It wasn't just a job. It was a voice, a responsibility, a trust. "You will lead our international hospitality teams." Daniel explained: coordinate state visits, humanitarian receptions, and intercultural diplomacy projects. "You'll be the face of sincerity and excellence, the values we want the world to see." For a heartbeat, Miriam couldn't speak. She remembered standing outside that cafe months ago, jobless, humiliated, doubting herself. She remembered whispering prayers under the Parisian sky, unsure if anyone heard. And now this. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she kept her composure. I accept," she said, her voice shaking with gratitude. "With all my heart." President Traoré stood, offering his hand across the table. Miriam rose and shook it firmly. "You have not only earned this," he said softly. "You have become a living example of what we are building, a future where sincerity leads, not appearances." As applause quietly filled the room, Miriam realized her kindness had not been wasted. Her struggles had not been unseen. Her prayers had not gone unanswered. She had not forced her way to the table of honor. She had been invited because she had already proven in silence and sincerity that she belonged there. And as she stepped out of that boardroom, Miriam stepped fully into her destiny, a destiny built not on ambition, but on compassion. The sun was setting as Miriam stood by the tall windows of her new office, the golden light bathing Paris in soft, breathtaking hues. She could see the river winding through the city, hear the faint hum of distant traffic, a living reminder that life, like the river, never stands still. She turned away from the view and glanced around her office. On the shelves were folders labeled with international summits. She had helped coordinate letters of appreciation from ambassadors and small gifts from dignitaries she had once served quietly in the shadows. But the item she treasured most sat framed on her desk, a receipt from the cafe where it all began, faded now, but still legible. A reminder of the night she chose kindness over fear, sincerity over self-preservation. Miriam smiled softly. Her journey wasn't about titles. It wasn't about the size of her office or the weight of her salary. It was about purpose, about standing for something when it was easier to walk away, about understanding that Allah sees every silent act of goodness, even when the world punishes you for it. She remembered how broken she felt that night she lost her job, how she had questioned if kindness had a place in a cold, calculating world. Now she knew kindness always has a place. It is not weakness. It is the unseen bridge between who we are and who we are meant to become. Miriam's story is a message to every young person doubting themselves today. You don't need a grand stage to matter. You don't need a famous name to make a difference. You don't need anyone's permission to live with sincerity. The world will sometimes overlook you, mock you, punish you for doing the right thing, but Allah never overlooks a sincere heart. And when the world closes its doors, He opens gates. You never imagined Miriam's rise wasn't a reward for ambition. It was the natural consequence of quiet integrity shining when it was hardest. And so under the soft Parisian sky, Miriam whispered one more prayer. Ya Allah, make me always among those who act with sincerity, even when no one sees, because, you see, her journey had taught her one thing most schools never teach. Character will take you further than any resume ever could. If Miriam's story touched you, remind yourself today, never stop choosing kindness. Never stop standing for what's right, even when no one applauds, because your sincerity is building a future greater than you can see. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe character is still the highest form of success. What if the man you humiliated on a flight turned out to be the president of a nation? What if your arrogance, your prejudice was exposed before the entire world with no way to undo it? This is the true story of a quiet traveler, a careless flight attendant, and a powerful CEO whose worlds were shattered by one silent act of dignity. Stay with us, because what happened next didn't just shake an airplane, it shook an entire continent. Watch till the end. This is a story the world must remember. The first light of dawn stretched across the cold European airport, casting long, quiet shadows over the polished floors. The terminal was almost empty, save for a few scattered travelers, wrapped in scarves and heavy coats. Among them sat a solitary figure at gate 37, a man dressed in a plain hoodie, jeans, and worn sneakers. No cameras followed him. No officials saluted him. He looked like any other tired African traveler waiting for his flight. But this man was far from ordinary. He was Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. He preferred it this way: no suits, no entourages, no special treatment, just a man among the people, walking their paths, breathing their air. His recent journey through Europe had been filled with intense, secret negotiations, talks of gold sovereignty, and the fragile dreams of a continent long underestimated. Deals had been made. Warnings had been given, and now, with the mission complete, all he wanted was to return home. The Air France flight to Ouagadougou was boarding soon. Traoré smiled warmly at a young airport worker passing by, greeting him in French. The worker smiled back, unaware of the history sitting quietly before him. That was how Traoré preferred it. Power should never demand attention. It should serve in silence. As he glanced up at the flight board, unaware that trouble was already brewing at the other end of the terminal, his heart remained steady. He had faced larger storms than delayed flights and arrogant businessmen. He leaned back in his seat, patient, grounded, waiting. The flight would be called soon, but little did anyone know that very journey, born in silence, was about to ignite a storm that would shake two continents. At the far end of the terminal, the air shifted no longer, calm but heavy with entitlement. A senior French CEO had arrived, flanked by assistants, dragging glossy luggage behind him. His shoes tapped impatiently against the marble floor, polished to mirror shine. His sharp suit, his Rolex watch, his loud voice all announced a man who was used to the world bending for him. His eyes swept over the gate agents like a king, surveying subjects. "There must be a mistake," he barked. "I always fly business. Confirm my upgrade." The airline staff fumbled with their tablets, exchanging nervous glances. Business class was full. There were no seats left. But this man wasn't used to hearing no, and he wasn't about to start now. "I am a strategic partner in Africa," he snapped, leaning over the counter. "Fix it." His assistants nodded firmly behind him, adding silent pressure. To him, rules were suggestions, boundaries were inconveniences. The agents, desperate to avoid a scene, whispered hurriedly among themselves. One finally made the call, summoning a senior flight attendant from the aircraft. She appeared swiftly, a young Muslim woman in a crisp Air France uniform, her hijab neatly pinned. Her expression was calm, professional, but inside she already sensed the battle ahead. "You must find a way," the gate supervisor hissed. "Move someone if you have to, just make room." The Muslim flight attendant hesitated only a second before nodding. Orders were orders. With a tight breath, she turned and made her way down the jet bridge toward the waiting plane. Inside, unaware of the storm coming, Ibrahim Traoré sat peacefully by the window, a quiet force, a storm yet unseen. The cabin of the plane hummed with a low, sleepy energy as the last few passengers settled into their seats. The Muslim flight attendant, clipboard in hand, stepped quietly into business class. Her polished shoes made almost no sound on the carpeted floor, But inside, her heart beat faster. Her eyes scanned the rows, quickly searching for a solution, searching for someone who wouldn't cause a scene. And then she saw him, a dark-skinned man in seat 2A, sitting alone, head bowed slightly as he read something on his phone. No expensive suit, no polished arrogance, no flashing signs of importance. She hesitated, something in her chest tightened. There was a presence about him, something calm, something heavy like a mountain, resting in a storm. For a moment she almost turned away, but then the pressure of her orders returned to her mind. Be professional, be efficient, fix the problem. She approached him with careful steps and a tight, polite smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently. "Would you mind showing me your boarding pass?" He looked up with steady, patient eyes and handed it to her without a word. She checked it once, twice. Seat 2A, exactly correct. Still, her supervisor's instructions echoed in her mind. "I'm terribly sorry," she continued, her voice low, almost apologetic. "There's been a seating issue. Would you be willing to move to economy? We can compensate you." For a heartbeat, there was only silence between them. Then, with a calmness that unnerved her, he asked, "And why me?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. She offered only a small, strained smile. "It's just operational." His eyes stayed on hers, steady, unblinking, as if he could see the battle raging inside her soul. For a long moment, the world seemed to slow around them, the quiet murmur of passengers, the muted clink of trays, all fading beneath the weight of his gaze. "I will remain in my seat," Ibrahim Traoré said softly. Not defiant, not angry, just unmovable like an ancient stone. The Muslim flight attendant's hands tightened around her clipboard. She hadn't expected resistance, especially not from him. She was used to passengers grumbling, complying, accepting. But this man, there was something deeper in his voice, something final. She swallowed and tried again, this time leaning closer, lowering her voice. "Please, sir, it's only a small adjustment. It won't take long. You'll be compensated generously." Traoré turned his face back toward the window, as if dismissing the very idea. "Compensation," he said almost to himself. "Some things are not for sale." His words fell heavy between them, cutting sharper than any refusal passengers nearby had begun to notice. A businessman lowering his newspaper, a woman pausing her laptop, eyes flickering toward the exchange. Curiosity stirred in the cabin, but no one dared intervene. The flight attendant stood frozen, caught between two worlds, the orders she carried in her hands and the unspoken truth reflected in the eyes of the man before her. Behind her, a buzz from the gate crew pushed urgency into her veins. The CEO was growing impatient. The seat had to be found, but Traoré remained untouched by their urgency, a figure of immovable calm. He did not plead, he did not shout. He simply existed with a dignity that could not be touched, not even by the hidden prejudices swirling around him. And somewhere deep inside her, the flight attendant felt the first crack form, not in him, but in herself. Panic whispered through the cabin like a cold draft. The Muslim flight attendant, feeling the impatient stares of her supervisors and the weight of expectations pressing down, moved stiffly away from seat 2A. She pretended to scan the other rows, but in truth, her orders were clear. Find someone easy to move. Her eyes betrayed her heart. She paused again and again, always at passengers who looked like him. Darker skin, simpler clothes. Faces that didn't seem to fit the imagined mold of business class. With trembling hands, she approached a young African man sitting 2 rows behind Traoré. He looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes as she leaned in and whispered, "Sir, we may need you to change seats for operational reasons." "Why me?" He asked softly, the same question that had hung in the air moments before. She couldn't answer. She could only force a smile and gesture toward the economy section. Around them, the silent witnesses grew. A few passengers exchanged glances. A woman closed her laptop without saving her work. An older African nurse clutched her bag tighter, her face tight with something between anger and sadness. They all saw it now. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about operations. It was about something uglier, something older. The injustice wasn't loud. It crept in the quiet decisions, in the careful glances, in who was asked and who was not. And yet Ibrahim Traoré sat still. He watched with steady eyes as the humiliation unfolded around him. He neither shielded himself nor interfered. He simply bore witness, calm, silent, unshaken, letting the weight of the moment settle heavily on every soul in that cabin, just as he knew was patient. And patience, when it breaks, can shake the earth. The hours crawled by, thick with an invisible tension no one dared name. Above the Atlantic, the plane sailed through endless blue, but inside the air was brittle. Every polite conversation strained, every laugh forced. The Muslim flight attendant moved through the aisles offering service with a hollow smile. She poured coffee, adjusted pillows, bowed slightly when the CEO snapped his fingers. Yet every time she passed Seat 2A, her heart stumbled. She could feel him there, still composed, a living reminder of the choice she had made. He asked for nothing. He demanded nothing. He simply existed, and somehow that shook her more than any protest ever could. The CEO grew bolder with every drink. His voice rose above the quiet, bragging loudly about civilizing projects in Africa, about contracts and control. Each word spilled like acid onto the worn dignity of the air around him. His laughter crackled like a dry flame. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few foreign businessmen chuckled along, but most simply looked down, unwilling to meet each other's eyes, pretending not to hear the storm building in their midst. In the window seat, Ibrahim Traoré remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the endless sea of clouds. His stillness was not surrender. It was a gathering, like the hush before a lion's roar, like the calm before the heavens split open. He could have revealed himself at any moment. With a single word, the entire plane would have fallen to silence. The CEO's arrogance would have shattered. But Traoré waited. He understood something they did not. True power is patient. It strikes only when it will be remembered forever. And so, through the thin walls of the sky, the silent storm swelled, unseen, but inevitable. The seatbelt signs blinked to life with a soft chime as the plane began its slow descent into Burkina Faso. The early morning sun painted the clouds gold and crimson, a breathtaking canvas spread beneath the wings. In the cabin, passengers stirred from uneasy naps, fastening belts, adjusting jackets. The CEO, yawning grandly, smoothed his expensive tie and glanced out the window with bored detachment. But then he frowned. Outside, an unexpected sight stretched across the tarmac, rows of black SUVs, military trucks, and armed soldiers standing rigid at full attention. Whispers rippled through the cabin. "Is there a war?" one foreigner murmured, clutching her handbag tighter. The CEO smirked arrogantly. "Relax," he said loudly. "That's probably my welcome party. Big projects, you know." The Muslim flight attendant peeked through a small window near the galley and felt her breath catch in her throat. She had never seen such a display, even for visiting dignitaries. Her clipboard slipped slightly from her fingers. The wheels kissed the earth with a jolt, and the plane rolled toward the gate. Tension thickened in the cabin like gathering storm clouds. Before anyone could unbuckle or stand, a tall figure in a black beret boarded the aircraft. His polished boots struck the floor sharply with every step. His eyes scanned each face with disciplined precision. He stopped at seat 2A. In one crisp, perfect motion, he raised his hand in a military salute. His voice rang out clear and commanding. "Mura President, welcome home." The air was sucked from the cabin. Gasps filled the silence. The CEO's smug grin cracked his mouth, hanging open in horror. The Muslim flight attendant stood frozen, color draining from her face as the truth struck like a thunderclap. They had tried to humiliate a lion. The silence inside the plane was absolute. It was as if time itself had frozen, holding its breath. Every pair of eyes turned towards Seat 2A, where Ibrahim Traoré slowly, gracefully rose from his seat. No anger, no pride, only a calm dignity that filled the cabin like a rising tide. The CEO stumbled backward a step, his face pale, his bravado shattered into dust. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering quietly on the carpet. The Muslim flight attendant could barely breathe. Her hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard like a shield, her mind replaying every moment, every polite insult, every hidden judgment, every silent compromise. Shame hollowed her chest. Ibrahim Traoré turned slightly and looked at her, not with hatred, but with something far heavier, disappointment. Another officer boarded swiftly, this one carrying formal documents. His voice, cold and official, cut through the stunned cabin. "You too," he said, pointing directly at the CEO and the flight attendant, "are to come with us now." The CEO blustered, waving his hands. "There must be some mistake I didn't know." The officer's face remained impassive. "Ignorance is no defense. You will be detained for questioning regarding public insult and discrimination against the head of state." The Muslim flight attendant opened her mouth, but no words came. She could only lower her head in silent acceptance, the magnitude of her failure crashing down on her. Passengers watched in horrified awe as both were escorted off the plane, no longer powerful, no longer proud, but small and exposed before the truth. Ibrahim Traoré stepped off the aircraft into the blazing Burkinabe sun, met by thunderous salutes and the proud waiting arms of his people. A new chapter had already begun. The heat of the Burkinabe sun was unrelenting, yet it was nothing compared to the scorching weight of judgment that now descended upon the two detained figures. The CEO, once so full of swagger, stumbled down the aircraft stairs in handcuffs, his head bowed, sweat soaking through his expensive suit. Behind him, the Muslim flight attendant walked slowly, her face pale beneath her hijab. The clipboard gone, the weight of regret heavier than any chain. Around them, rows of soldiers stood, motionless eyes hard, offering neither comfort nor cruelty, only the cold face of justice. Cameras flashed from a distance. Journalists whispered into microphones. Across the fences, citizens gathered, watching silently, recording every step. In the terminal, the Ministry of Justice officials waited with stern expressions. No fanfare, no speeches, only the quiet, methodical beginning of accountability. The charges were read plainly: public insult, discrimination against the head of state, abuse of authority, violation of national dignity. The French embassy sent urgent messages. Private calls were made, but the response from President Traoré's office was as immovable as the man himself. In Burkina Faso, no one is above the law, not foreigners, not businessmen, not even our own. The Muslim flight attendant, through tears during questioning, tried to explain how she was pressured, how she hadn't known. But the investigator's calm reply cut deep. "You didn't have to know who he was. You only had to treat him as a human being." The CEO demanded immunity, raged about investments, threatened consequences, but no power, no money, no influence could save him now. Outside, under the endless blue sky of Africa, a new message spread. Justice had a new face, calm, firm, and unafraid. By the time the sun reached its highest point over Ouagadougou, the story had already crossed oceans. Footage from the airport leaked online, shaky phone videos of soldiers saluting of the CEO and the Muslim flight attendant, being led away in stunned silence. Within hours, hashtags blazed across social media: Bourdina, respect Africa; Jarinan, stand with Burkina; Nar, dignity over privilege. News anchors scrambled to cover the unfolding storm. Analysts spoke of a seismic shift, of a new Africa rising. Youth across the continent cheered, waving flags, chanting Traoré's name in streets from Dakar to Nairobi. For the first time in many hearts, hope tasted real. Inside the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré stood at a simple podium before a cluster of local journalists. No grand show, no polished speeches, only truth. His voice was calm, but each word struck with the weight of history. In Burkina Faso, we do not measure a man by his skin or his wealth. We measure him by his dignity, by his humanity. This is not colonial Africa. This is sovereign Africa. We bow to no one but God. The crowd outside the gates erupted into cheers, their voices rising into the sky. The French embassy issued official protests. Air France rushed out a clumsy corporate apology filled with hollow regret. But the tide had turned. In cafes, on buses, in homes across Africa and beyond, ordinary people repeated the same phrase: respect is not given to the rich, it belongs to the righteous. And quietly, without fanfare, a once invisible man in a hoodie had ignited a revolution, not with armies, not with anger, but with patience, dignity, and an unbreakable silence that spoke louder than any shout ever could. Long after the crowds dispersed and the cameras turned away, the story of that flight lived on, whispered in marketplaces, debated in universities, sung in the melodies of street musicians. Children learned it by heart, the tale of the man who wore no crown, no robe, and yet commanded a loyalty no empire could buy. A man who chose silence over spectacle, patience over pride, and whose dignity bent the world without lifting a finger. They spoke of how he sat quietly while arrogance tried to strip him of honor, how he endured humiliation, not with anger, but with a stillness so vast it swallowed their cruelty whole, how he revealed himself not through power, but through presence. The CEO's downfall became a footnote, a cautionary tale of broken arrogance. The Muslim flight attendant, though punished, found a second life in humility, later dedicating herself to work that repaired dignity where it had once been torn. But it was Ibrahim Traore's silent stand that became legend. Murals were painted a man in a simple hoodie, standing tall against a roaring storm. Poems were written, statues imagined, and across Africa a new kind of pride took root. Not pride in wealth or conquest, but in quiet, unshakable dignity. They called it the day Africa stood without raising its voice. And whenever storms of injustice gathered again, whenever pride and prejudice sought to tear at the soul of the people, someone would whisper, "Remember the man at seat 2A." A reminder that true power is not in what you demand, but in what you refuse to surrender, even when the world pretends not to see. Especially then. And so from one silent morning, a legend was born, and the world would never again be the same. The story of Ibrahim Traore teaches a powerful lesson. True dignity does not shout, it stands firm in silence. In a world where appearances deceive and power often masquerades as worth it, is the quiet strength of character, not titles or wealth, that defines true greatness. Traore's calm resistance against injustice reminds us that we do not need to fight every insult with anger or every injustice with noise. Sometimes the most profound statement is to hold steady, to let our presence speak louder than our voice. In life, we are often judged by how we look, what we wear, or what others assume about us. But this story reminds me that real honor comes from how we carry ourselves when no one is watching, and how we remain unshaken when the world misjudges us. It calls me to be patient in the face of unfairness, courageous without arrogance, and to uphold the value of humanity over pride, wealth, or power. It is not what the world sees that matters most. It is what we build quietly within ourselves. True change begins not with shouting at the world, but by refusing to be moved from our deepest principles.